Hi, everybody, and welcome to Thursday of Baby Communication Week 2022. And the focus today is on listening to babies in the neonatal unit. So my name is Emily Hills, and I'm an occupational therapist. I work in a neonatal unit in London, where I get to lead on developmental care and neurodevelopmental follow-up, and really supporting families with parenting occupations, but also supporting staff and families with understanding more and more about baby behaviour. And then we also have Mel. So Mel, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. So my name's Melanie Gunning. I'm a clinical psychologist and I work in a level 3 unit in Scotland. And my role in the neonatal unit is really around family support and kind of emotional well-being um, as parents are going through what's inevitably an emotional roller coaster while their babies are in the unit and then once babies are discharged home. And so we do that in lots of different ways. And one of the ways we support parents is by using the neonatal behavioural observation tool, and I'm also a trainer in that, same as Emily.
Did I say I was a trainer or did I forget? I'm also a Brazelton trainer. Um, Sorry about that. Okay, so what we thought would be quite helpful was just to think about why baby behaviour is so important in the neonatal unit. So if I explain a little bit from the way I look at it, and then Mel will also explain to you. So if you think the sensory environment for the preterm infant is massively changed in the neonatal unit. So gone are the day of being surrounded in 360 degrees of fluid where you have pleasurable touch and it's dark and it's not quiet because you have the mother's amniotic fluid and her heartbeat and her digestive system, but you have this lovely flex tucked posture and you don't experience any pain at all. And if you're thrown out into the neonatal unit, it is painful and stressful to be separated from your parent. And you're also going to go through a whole lot of medical interventions and care procedures in order to survive. And many of them can be incredibly painful and stressful. So something as simple as having a nappy changed can be really stressful. And so it's so important that we understand baby behavior because we need to work out when little people are comfortable and when they're feeling massively overwhelmed by life. And so we will spend a lot of time with families looking at the bedside and wondering together. So wondering about little subtle color changes or perhaps little movements and just wondering, do they feel comfortable like that? Or is there something we can do perhaps in the environment or how they're sleeping in order to keep their physiological stability. What about you, Mel? Over to you.
Um, so when I'm meeting with parents at the cot side, oftentimes we're thinking together about who is this little person and how are they telling us about themselves? Not through being able to speak to us, obviously, but through how their bodies react and change to the environment and to what's happening around them or within them, because oftentimes babies are reacting to stuff that we can't see. So we ask ourselves things like, what does our little person like to look at? What How do they react when there are sounds going on around about them, or when the light changes, and that kind of thing. And we think about quite subtle cues sometimes, like how their facial expression might be changing, or how their colour might be changing, or the quality of their movements might be changing, and we make best guesses about what's going on for this little person and how he's feeling. And by doing that, we can modify the environment around them or provide them with some additional comfort or care that can help them through maybe some more difficult times.
I tell you, like using the knowledge that you have for the EMBO from Brazelton, I find incredibly helpful regardless of whatever the gestational age of the baby. So one of my favorite things to do on the unit is we do developmental journals. And so we we start when the babies are born. And if we're really winning at life, we manage to do this every week, but sometimes life gets in the way a little bit. But we'll do a cot side observation, and we'll look at the baby's autonomic stability, and we'll look at their motor, and we'll look at their sleep. And then we'll create a little profile for them. And we do it with the parents. So we'll say things like, hi, my name is Fred, and I like to sleep on my side. And I've got little nasal prongs in my nose to help with my breathing. And when I'm not feeling comfortable, I might go bright red and hold my breath or stretch my fingers out wide. And if you see me do this, just stop what you're doing and rest your hands on me. And actually what the parents, I mean, that's a really, really brief example, but what the parents have said is that they really like it because it kind of gives their baby a voice, and they're not just, twin one or twin two or baby who desats all the time, but that they're little Fred who has a personality. And not only does he have a personality, if you're writing a developmental plan, then you've also got hope that there's a next week and there's a next week. And so that is all from looking at baby behavior. And so, yeah, we bring in sensory stuff and we bring in the next developmental stage, but it's all based on baby behavior. And that can start as young as 22 weeks. So do you ever get when do you use the NBO then with families? Do you use it on the unit or post-discharge?
So I guess I tend to use NBO kind of wandering language at any gestation, but I might tend to use an actual NBO with the baby and the family a bit more. I was going to say formally, but that's the wrong word because it doesn't feel like a very formal kind of intervention, because you are really just using a set of strategies to ask questions of the baby so that they can tell you about themselves. And so I would tend to use that maybe going towards discharge or after discharge once baby's home. So I use it with neonatal babies, I think partly to help parents get to know their babies beyond all the medical stuff that's been happening to them. I also use it actually with when we work with families who might have had a difficult birth experience, which can often be a neonatal parent. But irrespective of a neonatal state, it can be a really helpful part of healing from a difficult birth journey, actually, as well, in terms of getting to know your baby at the same time as recovering emotionally from what's been a really difficult event.
Actually, that's a really good point, because I know I started out talking about preterm babies and how beautiful we can use the NBO from 22 weeks and up, not necessarily getting your blue bag out, but using the language. But actually, for your babies who've had a birth trauma or who've had cooling, it's a really lovely observation, because you're focusing on the strengths and you're focusing on what little people can do rather than on focusing on what's gone wrong. So you're right, it's important to give people a voice.
Yeah, and I think there's something lovely about how by observing really closely together, you're kind of right in the here and now with the baby. Whereas when you're going through a difficult event with a baby, whether that is your baby being born very prematurely or whether that is because of events around the birth or another reason, your brain has a tendency to kind of fast forward to what might be coming or what awful things might be around the corner, or to kind of go back in time to the events that led you here or difficult things that you'd experienced along the way. And it's really difficult to stay in the moment because our brains just find that really, really hard. So there is something quite almost mindful sometimes, I suppose, about just connecting with the baby in the here and now, and just taking that time together to look at those strengths. Because you're right, every baby has something they can do, and using the NBO can help us find out what that is.
Definitely. And so there are a lot of beautiful benefits for the baby to highlight the strengths, and for the families to be really grounded in the moment. And then I love using it with our nurses and doctors as well, because we ask a lot from our medical team, and we ask them to do a lot of things, a lot of medical interventions. And then we say, oh, you didn't manage that baby's pain properly. And actually, if we don't spend time with our colleagues looking at baby behavior, how is anyone ever meant to know whether something's painful or not? And so what we're trying to do, certainly in where I was working before, is we had a really lovely pain project where we created these films and we looked at good practice and bad practice, and we looked at good communication, but we made sure that we had a whole presentation on baby behavior, because we're asking our colleagues to work out how the babies are comfortable and when they're not. And if you can't read baby behavior, you're never going to know. And so a huge part of what we're asking everybody to do when they start working there is to spend a little bit of time observing babies and just looking at those subtle signs of sensitivity and those self-regulatory strategies, just to make life a wee bit easier. And that's probably one of the reasons why, like, I don't think any of us should be expected to work in neonatal care if we haven't been supported to understand nonverbal cues, in my opinion.
I think that's, I'm behind that. I think that happens in different ways in the unit where I work. We've only just very recently had an occupational therapist join our team, and I think there's a big emphasis on developmental care and baby cues, and I think we've been getting to know babies in a different way without using the NBO per se as a team. But I think the language of it still kind of is beginning to kind of infuse some of the things that we might do.
I found, so you know how when we're teaching the NBO and we use the acronym AMOR, so your language of love, for those of you who haven't heard of it, where we look at autonomic and motor and organization of states and responsiveness. And what's interesting is yes, we look at babies, but actually that's human beings. Like, your nonverbal cues are going to stay with you till you're 100. So if I came at you today and was like, Mel, I like this, you wouldn't say, oh God, Emily, let's do a Zoom call and present it to the world for Baby Communication Week. You would say, let's just do it another day instead. But little people will be like this the whole time, and we'll be like, still, we've got to get stuff done. And we just override some of those really obvious signs and don't give people a voice. And I think it's really important to understand that you have a voice from the day you're born. So let me see if I've got a couple of questions to ask you. Could you give me a top tip for parents and practitioners about how to listen to babies on the neonatal unit?
Okay. I think a top tip would be, pacing and timing. So when there's not an emergency procedure to be carried out, is to give yourself the luxury of almost like freezing your interaction with the baby with a beginning and an end, so that maybe you're varying the intonation of your voice, or you're providing a preparatory touch to baby to let them know that something is about to happen. So whether that's a movement or an intervention of another kind, some kind of change, they're getting the cues for this means something's going to happen, and then they get a chance to ready themselves. And there's something about also closing off something that happens as well, with something that marks the end of that moment as well, whether that's then just a very gentle rested hand for a short period of time to help them resettle, or something else that works out as part of what you do.
So we always say, first talk, then touch, and then move. And we kind of like, that could be whether you're working in the elderly setting, because no one wants to be bombarded with sensory input. And there's a really good book that you might have read recently, Mel, by Sue Ludwig, called oh my gosh, Tiny Humans, Big Lessons. Oh, if I messed that up, I'd be terrible. Have you got it there?
Yeah, I do actually.
Look at that. You're going to make me very proud. There we go, everybody. Tiny Humans, Big Lessons. But what's so nice about that is that she starts with the 5-second rule, but actually whittles it down to 3 seconds, because human beings can't cope. But it's really nice. It's about coming to the cot side with the right intention, and about grounding yourself, leaving your baggage at the door, and setting an intention for the interaction. And it's so beautifully done. So we really both of us recommend you read that book, just to understand a little bit more about listening to babies on the neonatal unit, because that book summarizes it beautifully. And then also Cherry Bond, who is an amazing neonatal nurse who worked in West London. She came up with the 5-step dialogue, which they teach a lot on the FINE program, which is a developmental care program. And again, it's a beautiful guide for how you interact. And it is about, getting everything ready and gathering your intention, but also, as you said, Mel, completing it before you walk off. And I think we've all been guilty, and we've certainly all seen it, or people being very task orientated and going like, right, I've got to get this bit done, and getting that bit done, and then walking off and leaving little people flailing. And so if we interact with another human being, it's relationships, nothing about it is a task. And so we have to do it in a really loving, kind way, or there is probably no point to us being there.
Yeah. There's also something about, a baby who's been in the neonatal unit and then is at home later on and older, or a baby who's been born at term and is older, is that we intuitively do things with our babies that do prepare them for movement. So when you're going to pick up a baby, generally you don't just kind of like go and pick them up and move them. They observe you coming towards them, and you're probably talking to them at the same time, aren't you? Saying, "Oh, we're going to pick you up now," and then you can feel babies begin to kind of expect and anticipate and brace themselves, like they're kind of getting ready for what's coming next. So it's the same thing, just kind of done earlier. And yes. I love that you're kind of talking about it with intention as well, because that's about us kind of regulating ourselves, and so that we can then support the regulation of this little person whose systems aren't as developed and robust as ours are, hopefully. Yeah.
What about your thoughts when little people go home from the neonatal unit, and sometimes people might accidentally be very keen to help with their development and might overstimulate? Have you ever come across that or seen baby behavior that would say, actually, this is way too much?
Yeah, I think some of the most valuable INBO interactions I've had with families have been around, I think, observing babies who actually find it quite hard to communicate when their stress levels are or they're finding things a bit more difficult, and they need a bit of either space or a bit of a break, or a bit of time to do something different, or a bit of a change. Because most babies will have a nice big robust cry and they'll tell you, or they'll begin to kind of change their state and become fussy alert, and then maybe that might escalate into a bigger cry. But for some babies that we work with, their ways of telling us might be more just kind of looking away, might be where their energy levels are at, or it might be tensing and splaying out, might be their way of telling us when they need a break.
I always think it's the little ones who give up the will to live a little bit, who lose all their tone and shut down. They're the more dangerous. That's the more dangerous behavior, because people go like, put you to sleep. And I've seen it on the neonatal unit where somebody will be doing like a painful procedure, but without thinking the whole thing through. So maybe putting a cannula through, and they'll be going, there wasn't a bother on them. And you're like, you know what, if you pierce the flesh of another living human being, it will definitely hurt them. So I think they may have just, been completely overwhelmed. And that's in neonates, that's one of the reasons why pain assessment tools are so notoriously difficult, is because of that complete loss of tone and just sort of giving up a wee bit. And you do see it with term babies as well, when they're really sort of, sensory sensitive, and they're a bit overwhelmed by life, and they just sort of, lose the will to live. And so people come at them harder and faster. And one of our colleagues, and I'll let you guess who this is, she'll be horrified that I'm going to tell you this story, but when she was a baby, people used to think that she was deaf, and her family would put her in these bouncy chairs and bounce her, and then come behind her and bang pots, and she wouldn't be doing anything. And it wasn't until she became a Brazelton trainer that she went, oh my God, I think I was shut down all this time. But it's your coping mechanisms. You just like lose your tone, give up, hope it all goes away because it's just way too much.
Yeah,
And so I think,
freeze.
yes, that total freeze, not a healthy thing to do. So, yeah, but relationships, which is what humans are all about, is based on our ability to interact, and that's based on our ability to read each other's nonverbal cues.
Yeah, and to support each other to regulate through our conversations.
There we go, which I believe we've been doing a good job of right now. So let's not get hysterical at the end. So, Mel, my love, you have done it. You have talked beautifully about listening in the neonatal unit. And so thank you so much for being prepared to chat this evening. And I hope you're going to enjoy the rest of the week, all about listening to all about baby communication. Thank you very much.
Thank you.